Today, I want to talk about the nuclear family. You know, that 1950s American phenomenon of a two-parent, heteronormative, single-income household, where the husband works all day and the wife stays home, popping out babies and cooking.
Want a peek too? Come closer.
Historically, it's often referenced as the idealized family unit, and although it's clearly not representative of most families today, the term has been popping up quite often on social media. To the dismay of many, groups like tradwives and men's rights activists are trending. But there's more to this story.
There are so many men and women using their social media to promote and showcase traditional gender roles because they are valued.
If we want to have healthy societies, it's a man and a woman in a relationship with children, raising those children in a two-parent house.
Women can and ought to be judged by the criteria of femininity, for it is in their femininity that they participate in the human race.
Really? Wow, that's great. Congrats.
What if I told you that, in their own way, these are the rebels of 2024? The defiance of society. I know, it's a bit weird. We're used to seeing progressive groups like hippies or hipsters, people against the status quo of the oppressive capitalist machine. To be confronted instead with men and women who want nothing more than to go back to archaic gender oppression feels wrong. It creates a dissonance with our historical ties to the definition. But becoming a rebel has never required a progressive mindset. The Oxford Dictionary defines a rebel as a person who rises in opposition or armed resistance against an established government or ruler. Let's take a look at our political landscape. Same-sex marriage is legal. Women can hold jobs and be paid theoretically the same amount as a man. We even have a female vice president. Now, there's still so much progress to be made, but there's also so much equality we've gained in the past century in America. Compared to most countries, many would say that the American woman is now synonymous with an independent woman. Acknowledging all of this progress, it's not a leap to see how this group of tradwives and men's rights activists can be viewed as a minority rising up in society. In this context, they are rebelling against these freedoms, against us. We are the man. And honestly, it feels kind of cool. These types of regressive movements are also not new. Conservative radical action against the majority has been seen at many points throughout history in response to progressive change paired with unprecedented times, of which my emails are definitely still finding us in. Some infamous historical examples are Jim Crow laws and segregation, which were blatant conservative efforts to counteract the abolishment of slavery and equalization of Black Americans, respectively. A less institutionalized and more everyday example would be like those Facebook rants that come from estranged family members that pop up every June asking why we never celebrate Straight Pride Month.
Let me hear you say straight pride!
Any objective observer can note how suspicious it seems that straight people never cared about having a holiday until the LGBTQ+ community got national recognition. That's because these movements are not independent actions. They're rather reactions garnered in response to large-scale change. They are counter-revolutions, attempts to reverse the results of progress. And like how today's children yearn for the mines, this particular counter-revolution of conservative Christians yearn for the 1950s. More specifically, they want a re-implementation of the hierarchical social structure that represents everything they miss in modern society. The nuclear family. Let's talk a little bit more about this nuclear family. It's not a niche concept, especially if you've been raised with an American education. But given its significance in this video, I'd like to formally introduce it with a definition. The nuclear family, as defined in the context of 1950s America, was characterized by an economically stable household consisting of a father, mother, and 2 or 3 children. The father was generally the breadwinner and family disciplinarian, while the mother typically stayed at home to raise the children and manage the household. Outside of this definition, the term has substantial cultural and historical relevance in the United States. We see it in popular media of the time like Leave It to Beaver, and of the present like Mad Men. Often, it's associated with success and achieving the American dream. It's an especially beloved and idolized term among the conservative majority, where it has become a symbol of American values. Conservatives are constantly posturing the importance of upholding a nuclear family and attacking the left for destroying it. Laura Ingraham, an American conservative television host, recently opened Fox with this message.
And finally, for the regime, the greatest threat to humanity, other than climate change, comes from social conservatives, or whatever faith. They're far more dangerous than the CCP, or even foreign terrorists for that matter. The regime knows that people whose hope lies in heaven, and who pay more attention to the Bible than to the media, aren't easily manipulated or bossed around. This is why they seek to upend traditional institutions like law enforcement, the military, and the nuclear family.
To see the top-rated cable news network in the country equate the importance of the nuclear family to both law enforcement and the military should tell you more than enough about the power conservatives assign it and why they're fighting so hard for its reinstatement. This movement, to go back to simpler times, has been termed rebellious traditionalism. Now, I'm not one to be critical of someone's sentimentality for the past. I sometimes try and hack into my old Webkinz account. But when it comes to the aggrandization of nuclear families, I firmly believe that what these people root for is not real. The nuclear family, as they describe it, has never existed. It could not exist then, and it could not exist now. Not without a myriad of factors, economic, institutional, and societal, that represent a truly anomalous era. That's what I want to talk about. This mythos behind the family unit that Americans put on a pedestal. Let's discuss how the nuclear family came to be, its prompt downfall, and most importantly, why we will never see it rise again.
Part 1. The Rise of the Nuclear Family.
To properly explain all of this, we need to first zoom out and look at the history of families in the United States. It's important to note that the United States has existed for around 248 years. The nuclear family existed at its peak within the United States for about 15 years, from around the time Americans returned home from World War II in 1945 to the early 60s. That's about 6% of this country's existence. It's not even a long enough period of time for any child to fully grow up in. So why is this family structure given so much significance? And what was family like before? Well, for most of American history, family was first and foremost an economic unit. They were large, consisting of many children and extended relatives like aunts, uncles, and cousins. Everybody worked together to produce goods, make wages, and otherwise survive. There was a certain necessity to having children who back then could work on the farm or take up a factory shift to keep food on the table. Marriage itself was regarded as more of a business transaction than anything else. It was a decision to combine families made based on mutual benefits, such as financial or status. This started to change beginning in the late 19th century and into the early 20th, when marrying for love became a trend. Yes, it legitimately went into fashion to find a partner based on love instead of money and property. During this time, we also saw American women drift away from traditional family structures. They were encouraged to work in factories during World War I and World War II while men were overseas fighting.
Isn't this a funny place for you?
Not if it helps win the war.
This gave a financial independence that, when combined with continually evolving legislative freedoms, led to women staying single longer and divorcing more often. In the 40s, the annual divorce rate reached 3.4 divorces for every 1,000 Americans. For context, the CDC's current divorce report for 2023 is 2.5 per 1,000. Given this, I almost look at what happened next, the initial rise of the nuclear family, as a counter-revolution of its own. But counter-revolutionists aren't born from just progressive change. They also need instability in the country. And unfortunately, there was just that, as the country was entering the Cold War, a tempestuous time between the United States and Soviet Union. Americans were tired and anxious, fearing daily threats of military attack from communists.
We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it, just as we are ready for many other dangers that are around us all the time.
The Red Scare, as it was termed, swept through the country, and many looked to religion to soothe discomfort. The 50s saw a spike in Christianity, with almost half of Americans reporting to attend church on Sunday. That is the highest recorded number in American history. So, you've got divorce rates rising, a governmental need to restore a stringent male and female role structure that had been slowly blurring over the last couple of decades, the highest devoted number of Christians ever in the States, and the threat of communism. These are the secret ingredients of the 1950s. Mix them all together, bake at 350 for a couple of years, and you have the rise of the nuclear family. Initially, the nuclear family's importance was conveyed through propaganda rallying against communists. America needed to be seen as the antithesis of communism. One way to do so was by institutionalizing capitalism. Have men work and generate income while women stay at home, raising children with capitalist values. The family unit would become the main economic unit of consumption. Wealth was passed from parents to children, further integrating social class, which socialists hate. And if the socialists hate it, Americans love it.
Oh, groovy, smashing, yay capitalism.
Speaking emotionally as well, I think that there were also many families who had been separated during the years of war and longed for togetherness and any return to normalcy. Health, safety, and family were all many wanted, and this was being promised with the comfort of a white picket fence.
Part 2. The 1950s in practice.
Quickly, the nuclear family structure was adopted. Men returned home from war and resumed their old work. They took positions as the sole provider of their home. They wore suits and ties, were kind to their wife, and contributed to the capitalist machine. All of this made them the perfect American man. Women started marrying younger, with the nation emphasizing the fulfillment homemaking and childbearing would bring. The MRS degree became popularized, which was the notion that women, if they didn't stop educating themselves after high school, which usually they did, would go to college with the primary purpose of getting that ring. Which is honestly understandable when you realize that most places did not hire married women anyway. Single women would pursue common careers such as secretaries and bank tellers, with the understanding that they would drop their career when a man dropped to one knee. Of course, this is not true of every woman, but this idea of marriage and children coming before an education and other aspirations was the norm. These men and women would marry, move into large suburbs, and start having children. Men were fulfilled by work and a loving home, while women took pride in keeping a clean household and raising children. Closeness to the church brought children moral teachings and manners, while they were allowed to have the fun of a childhood that their parents were deprived of. From an outsider's perspective, the 50s were shaping up to be an actual American dream. It sounds almost too good to be true, and that's kind of because it is. I neglected to talk about how this was possible. I mean, we know why the nation wanted it, pushed for it, but plenty of dreams fail upon application. So how was the nuclear family so able to quickly establish itself as the perceived norm? Well, a huge contributor was the 1950s economy. While other countries were in shambles rebuilding from World War II, the American economy boomed. It was the only reason the average family could afford to live on a single income, which is kind of a big part of this whole charade. Men aged 24 to 29 were earning on average 400% more than their fathers did when they were the same age. To show just how insane that spending power is, I used an inflation calculator to understand, and was honestly shocked to learn that the dollar in 1950 has the value of $12.48 today. Let's look at how that spending power translates into buying a home. In an article titled, "Why Buying a House is So Much Harder Today Than in the 1950s, Patrick Sisson writes, according to a rough calculation using federal data, the average teacher's salary in 1959 in the Pacific region was more than $5,200 annually, just shy of the national average of $5,306. At that time, the average home in California cost $12,788. At the then standard 5.7% interest rate, the mortgage would cost $59 a month, with a $2,557 down payment. If your monthly pay was $433 before taxes, $59 a month wasn't just doable, it was also within the widely accepted definition of sustainable, defined as paying a third of your monthly income for housing. Adjusted to today's dollars, that's a $109,419 home paid for with a salary of $44,493. So we're being screwed both ways. That $110,000 figure might sound doable, but the reality is homes cost an average of $400,000 nowadays, and our wealth is historically depreciating over time. The average salary in 2023 was just shy of $60,000. So home prices have gone up over 4 times, while salaries haven't even doubled. Don't think about it too much. If you do, you might spiral into sadness, which is not my intention. I do hope, though, that you feel disillusioned from the idea that this is a lifestyle that can be replicated in the modern day. It's a miracle it was even doable back then. Even if most of us wanted to go back to the nuclear family dynamic, it wouldn't happen without heavy financial assistance. Is it impossible? Of course not. Could it be the standard for a middle-class family? Absolutely no. Economic boom aside, let's also demystify the very definition of the nuclear family. We described it earlier as an economically stable household, consisting of a father, mother, and 2 or 3 children. The father was generally the breadwinner and family disciplinarian, while the mother typically stayed at home to raise the children and homemake. I'd consider this a widely accepted definition of the structure and roles, yet it's not quite accurate. More specifically, to say a mother stayed home and raised the children is actually wrong. Americans strive towards independent function, and we like to think of the nuclear family as just that, an independent unit functioning smoothly without the need for external assistance. It's not practical, though, to stack all of the responsibility of children on 1 or even 2 parents. We don't do it now. We use daycares, babysitters, grandparents, the school systems, and honestly, we didn't do it back then either. Mothers of the time took full advantage of suburban lifestyles. Husbands would go off to work in the morning, leaving an entire community of women and children home alone. These women would support each other in every aspect of life. They would regularly take turns watching the neighborhood children, host events on each other's lawns, share parenting concerns and tips, and make food to feed empty stomachs. Overall, they would work together to provide the foundational support that any singular family lacked. Suburbia acted as a backbone for raising entire communities of children, and in many ways, neighbors were seen more as extended family units. I want to preface that while I think this was really good practice, especially because many families found themselves living without extended members for the first time in their life, it doesn't fit our traditional view of the era. Utilizing a community to educate and raise children is not in line with the standards of a nuclear family. It breaks the mold, or rather, it's more accurate to say that there never was a mold in the first place. The reality of it is that the families of the 1950s didn't even hold up to the standards that are romanticized in the media today. The narrow view of this time period leaves out the nuances and context in favor of upholding an image, but the image itself cannot exist without the details. Yes, the nuclear family existed in some fashion, but our modern idea of it never did.
Part 3. The Ugly Underbelly.
It brings to question what other details we've opted to leave behind in hopes of keeping fond remembrance of the era. Not to say it hasn't gotten its fair share of niceties. Divorces were low, jobs were great, and there was food on the table. You could spend your night at drive-in theaters or dancing the twist at a dinner party with friends. You could even get vaccinated for polio. These are the parts of the era that we love to reminisce about and portray in modern media. We've developed a drunken nostalgia by suckling on the memories passed down by elders who often regard it as the greatest time in American history. The iconic aesthetics and sentiments present themselves to some as a timeless love. But if you ask me, it's more of a 4 beers deep, alone at a dive bar and rocking a thick set of beer goggles kind of love. I mean, sure, the air is cute at first glance, and maybe it'd be fun to explore for a night, but the next morning you'll wake up with a massive hangover and realize you're in bed with the kind of Mississippi 10 your MAGA grandfather would approve of. So let's sober up and look this mistake straight in the face, because hidden behind innocent poodle skirts and three-piece business suits were societal atrocities that were actively perpetuated to oppress and diminish anyone who went against the status quo. For example, let's take a closer look at that divorce rate. It's true that this decade saw one of the lowest divorce rates in American history. This doesn't mean that the partners were happier, though. In reality, there was a fear around divorce, and it was seen as highly stigmatizing by the general public.
Divorce was almost unthinkable.
The unthinkable could only happen to a bad wife, one who neglected his career.
Hello, darling.
For heaven's sakes, Doris, are you just starting to get dinner? Don't you realize we've got the boss coming at 7:30? It's after 7 now.
If you, like many, rushed into nuptials after World War II, driven by the fear of not seeing tomorrow, you were now pressured by family and friends to pursue that commitment forever or be branded with a large scarlet D. You see, cheating was permissible, especially for men, but once a divorcee, always a divorcee. Women especially were in a bind, as the single-income household meant that they were financially dependent on their husband. Even legally speaking, divorce was a stringent affair that differed state to state, but more often than not required one to prove their spouse had done something wrong in order to qualify for divorce. Think adultery, abuse, abandonment, all the A's. Further, they had to prove that they themselves didn't do anything wrong. Otherwise, it would be considered a quid pro quo affair, and the case would be tossed. I always find it ironic how men joke about being shackled into marriage when, historically, they're the ones that wouldn't let women leave. Also, don't think you'll find the loophole in this situation by dodging marriage and staying single forever, because guess what? That wasn't allowed either. A 1957 survey revealed that the majority of Americans felt that adults who preferred to be single were immoral and neurotic. A loveless marriage can feel surprisingly tame against the threat of social isolation from family, friends, and peers. Oh, and it has to be of the opposite sex. I mentioned that, right? Because this was many, many years before same-sex couples could marry. In fact, this was before anyone could even come out. There was a status quo, which, in my opinion, is just a layman's instrument for normalizing oppression into everyday lives, and the LGBT community stood directly in opposition to it. There was ample legislation that targeted and limited the community, such as the 1953 Executive Order 10450 that barred lesbian and gay people from applying to federal jobs. Prejudice limited opportunity, and so people lived their entire lives lying about who they were, or never even knowing themselves. We can't speak about oppression without acknowledging segregation and racism. During this time, Black Americans were fighting for equality socially, economically, educationally, and in almost every other facet of life. This was a historic time for civil rights, but the Civil Rights Act itself would not be signed until 1964. This time before that is dark and savage. All of this prosperity I've talked about, all of the good things about this era, were kept from African Americans. They were gate-kept from suburban neighborhoods. They weren't allowed full military benefits from the war, such as having access to low-cost mortgages, and they were denied unemployment benefits if they rejected work with salaries below the poverty line. And that's just the surface of it all. Ruby Bridges, the first Black American to attend a white school in the South, did not do so until 1960. This was a messed up time, and anyone who romanticizes this era without acknowledging and denouncing the moral crimes committed during it needs some firm introspection. Honestly, I haven't even covered half of the issues I wanted to. We haven't even touched on teen pregnancy, environmental waste, xenophobia, mental illness. This video could easily turn into a whole series detailing each topic alone. But I guess what I hope you take away from this is that the benefits of the coveted 1950s nuclear family, with all of its financial freedom and charm, were limited to a very select conservative white class of citizens, and it was perpetuated with a choking social pressure and threat of isolation that kept those privileged few in line. It was a structure that thrived under the post-war boom, but ultimately did not have the best interest of every American at heart. And the ideological practices conservatives praised from back then stoked the fire of its own state where, only a decade later, it was subsequently burned during some of the biggest cultural revolutions in American history. Looking back at all of this now, I hope you also see that the concept of the nuclear family is itself more fiction than fact. It existed, yes, but in a small, highly controlled bubble of time. Even if we wanted to, we have neither the economy nor the theocracy to sustain it in the modern age. And its fundamental principles stand in direct opposition to over 70 years of equal rights work. Still, what these people fight and pine for must be real in some sense. Even if there is no practicality to what they're asking for, the feelings of what they want are real. It's in my opinion that what they're chasing isn't created from good Christian values or a white picket fence. If we tear away the gender norms and provocative political statements, I think what these people really want is family. Family. A concept we all know, but unfortunately do not all have the privilege of experiencing. Unconditional love, support, and care are fundamental for every human. Yet, Americans have never been more disconnected. Half of adults in the country report experiencing loneliness and isolation, and it's affecting health. Studies have shown loneliness increases a person's risk of premature death by 26%. We are in an epidemic. It makes sense to me that people feeling lost and fragmented would see this golden family depicted everywhere. A family where parents love and provide while children live happy, carefree lives, and that they would want to replicate it. Going back to the past fixes nothing, though. It only glamorizes a Band-Aid, and we need a real solution. I know I poked a lot of fun at the tradwife community, but jokes aside, these are all real people. People who are searching for a family structure where they feel loved. Even though I, as well as many others, disagree with that structure, I hope that we can all find some commonality and grace in empathizing with the universal search for community. Thanks for watching.